Good evening, everybody, and welcome to those in the audience here and also to those out in the virtual audience. Mr. Magaracci, you're logged on, so we have.
Michelle saying no sound.
He's muted.
Hold on one second. No, I know he's muted. They said they can't hear us.
They got it now.
I got it now?
Okay.
Can everybody hear me?
Yeah.
Joe, can you hear me? Just wave.
I can hear you.
Yeah.
Okay.
He's
muted.
Okay,
Yeah.
yeah, he's muted, that's fine. All right, we're gonna, try to start from the beginning. Welcome to everybody that's here in the audience and everybody that's out in the virtual audience. We're gonna start the meeting, by passing a few resolutions. We have docket number 1-300 through 1-303.
So
Second. Do we have any, Joe, that includes you, so unmute yourself because I'm going to need to hear you when you vote. I don't know if Bobby's in the audience. Unmute, Joe.
Probably doesn't let him now. It'll work now.
Try now.
Okay, we're good.
Okay,
One
so,
thing is the,
what? So again, 1-300 to 1-303, which was motioned by Mrs. Graves and seconded by Mrs. Shinsato. Any questions on those items? Okay, all in favor? Aye. Motion passes. Mr. Raymond, do you want to discuss that really quickly, or we're just going to go past it? Okay. So at this time, we'll move on to the fun part of the evening, budget time. Tonight's agenda is to discuss the non-instructional budget items for this year coming up. So I'm going to turn the microphone over to Mr. Press, who's going to take us through the budget presentation this evening. Joe, you can mute now. Joe, you can mute now, so then they can talk. You're good.
Ready for you to start?
Yeah.
All right.
Sorry.
No, I'm saying, just remember they can't see you, so it's, you don't have to.
Give me a second, we're gonna have. All right, so hoping everyone at home can see the presentation. Good evening, everyone. Thank you for having me here. We're excited to kick off the start of our budget presentation season. I have one goal, which I was asked not to bore Ms. Bryant with my presentation, so just please let me know if that starts to happen, Ms. Bryant or anyone else notices Ms. Bryant is bored. I will try not to bore her.
I got a stream for you.
We are here, we are excited to present to you our proposed budget for 22-23. It's a continuation of the last few years of my time here of presenting to the community what we feel are fiscally responsible budgets and budgets that continue to provide opportunities for our students. The focus of our budgets have been and will continue to be on improving student outcomes and improving the environment in which our students learn so that they can grow and thrive. And when they graduate from West Hempstead, they can go out and become productive members of society and contribute in tremendous ways. I do want to thank the administrators for their assistance in putting this the budget together. We did ask a lot of them this year. They did rise to the challenge. So thank you for all the work you all put in putting this budget together. I want to also thank my central office colleagues for their assistance and guidance as well. And our payroll department, our transportation coordinator, and our district treasurer all contributed to put this together. Would not be possible without their assistance. So, all right. So Just at a high level, once again, this year, we did face some headwinds in putting this budget together. It was a little bit of a challenge. I believe we rose to the challenge, and you'll see that as we present the budget going forward. Once again, we'll talk about this. One of the things that we faced, one of the challenges we faced was, yet again, transportation. And we'll get more into that as we go. Real quick, just this is our budget timeline for presentations and budget adoptions. So we're doing non-instructional budgets this week. Next week, we'll do instructional categories, revenue, state aid. We hold March 22nd in case there is a need for further discussions, if anything changes between now and then at the state level in terms of the state aid. And the board is set to adopt the budget on April 12th. Our sort of final public presentation is May 3rd. That is the legally required budget hearing, which is held no later than 2 weeks before the budget vote. And our budget vote is May 17th. As usual, in the middle school and from 7 a.m. to 9 p.m. All right, so our proposed budget for 22-23 is approximately $71.2 million. That represents about a $2.5 million budget to budget increase, which is 3.61%. It is supported and funded in part by a 2.14% tax levy increase. That is at and within our tax cap, and which we'll go into in more detail later. I did want to point out, to keep in mind, in the 2021 school year, as you recall, we went out with a 0% tax levy increase. So in the 3 years leading up to next year's budget, our average tax levy increase is 1.5, or just less than 1.5% over 3 years. In terms of the increase, about a third of that increase is transportation. About 27% of it is in medical insurance premiums, and just under 12% is in pension contributions. So between those three items, it's about 75% of the increase that we're talking about going into next year. And if you guys have questions at any time, just feel free to stop me and ask questions. Oh, I got that. Okay. All right, so some of the challenges that we faced in going into budgeting. The 2% tax levy limit, this is something we face every year. We faced since its inception about 10 years ago. So it puts a cap on our ability to raise revenue at the local level to fund the programs that we want to include in our budget. Additionally, foundation aid is not fully funded, has not been fully funded. There's conversations about fully funding the formula, which they have taken steps, large steps really, to do. But in that conversation, the conversation has not been to go and backfill the hole that they left by not fully funding the foundation aid formula since its inception in the 2007-2008 school year. Had that formula been fully funded all along, we would have, here in West Hempstead, actually had $8 million more in state aid over that period of time. Just to my knowledge, usually my slide over the last few years has included the little tricks that the governor has tried to slip into the budget. There are no tricks this year. In the past years, the governor, Pittman governor, has tried to cap increases in state aid. There's none of those little tricks slipped into the budget going into next year, so that is a good sign. Additionally, and this is a sort of a perennial favorite here, challenges to budgeting, we have a lot of unfunded mandates that are sent down from the states that we are required to fund, but that for which we do not receive any additional support from the state. Things like charter school funding, and we have had increases in our enrollment, very incremental increases in charter school enrollment over the last few years. But every time that happens, we have to share about $18,000 in tuition costs with the charter schools. Health insurance, as you may have seen in your own lives, premiums increased on average about 12% for our active employees in calendar year 2022. We have built into the budget an estimate of another 9% increase going into 2023. All of those free COVID tests really that free. We're paying for it now. Additionally, pension contributions, we are budgeting for increase there as well. These are all very, I would say, worthy programs, good things to have, but these are imposed on us and we do not get additional funding to help pay for them. So just to get into a little bit of detail, a little bit more detail about our top three drivers of our increase this year. The retirement system payments, we are budgeting for approximately a $285,000 increase. That is largely due to the increase in the TRS contribution rate. Again, medical insurance premiums, I mentioned the average increase was 12% for our active employees. We're budgeting for a $680,000 increase going into next year. And then our favorite, transportation. I just wanted to share with you a little bit of the increases that we've seen or that we are budgeting for over the last few years. So in 2021 school year, this is an actual expenditure. This is in the audited numbers in the financial statements of $1.1 million increase in 2021. Going into the current year, we had budgeted for $1 million increase. At the current time, we are actually forecasting to exceed that budgeted increase. We built in another $850,000 increase going into next year as well. In terms of transportation, historically, I really wanted to go back and see, back to the earlier days when things were a little, nicer on us in terms of transportation. So we went back and looked 8 years back, and in the 15-16 to 16-17 school year, slight increase, a little bit under $4 million there. 17-18, I'm sorry, things kind of creep up by about 400,000. Stay a little bit flat, 18-19, and then we start seeing these increases. So 19-20 had a little bit of an increase. We start seeing some of our low-cost carriers actually going out of business or being bought out by other carriers, and then we start. 2021, that's when we saw that $1.1 million increase. 21-22, again, the budgeted $1 million increase, and the $850,000 in 22-23 that we're budgeting. In that 8-year span, our transportation costs have increased 97%. It's almost doubled in the period of 8 years. To be clear, I just want to add some additional context here. I couldn't figure out how to get it in the chart. I'll try to do that maybe for next time. The number of students that we are transporting has not increased. The number of students we've transported out of district in that 8-year period has only increased about 11%. And the number of schools that we transport students out of district has not increased that greatly, to about 7.5% in that 8-year period. What has changed is the rates that we're being charged by the bus companies. So in terms of the, Chris likes my slide. How we doing? Okay, good. We transport about 1,200 students to over 100 schools. And how we pay for those students, again, this won't be new for most of you. If we have enough students going to school, we will pay for the entire vehicle, whether it's a bus or a van, in some cases multiple buses, multiple vans. If we don't have enough students, then we'll pay for students on a per student basis. And typically that's either a flat rate for each student, regardless of the number of students, or what we're seeing more these days is a higher rate for the first student and a lower rate for each additional student. The numbers you're seeing up on screen, those are actual numbers from some of our contracts from this year. So in some cases, we pay $731 a student. In some cases, we're paying $5,800 a student, which translates into $58,000 in a 10-month period. Okay. And in terms of the contracts, when contracts are not renewed by the bus companies, we have to competitively bid them. Part of the problem that as I see it with these with the transportation costs is we are not seeing competitive bidding, and we're not the only ones. This is a problem that we're seeing within our quadrant here in Nassau County of the school districts in the Southwest quadrant, and we're seeing it elsewhere as well. We can renew our contracts. When we do renew contracts, really it's the bus companies that determine whether or not they want to renew. And that happens a lot of the times. It hasn't been happening the last 2 years. The companies have chosen not to renew. So that's what we've gone out to bid. But when we do renew, we are by law, the bus companies are required to renew only at an increase at the rate of inflation, which has been low for a number of years. The current year, the rate of inflation is 3.2%. As you all know, I'm sure, you see this out in the community, inflation is at a 40-year high. We are anticipating inflation rates when the rate is set in May of about 5%. And that's just kind of the way things are out there. Okay. Any questions about any of that so far? Just so you know, we're not, Ms. Gandolfo, our transportation coordinator, and we have been working very diligently trying to find efficiencies in the budget. We've identified a few. Our original projection for the transportation budget increase was larger. We've identified some efficiencies in there. I've reached out to some bus companies to try to find other efficiencies where we can. I have taken a bit of a leading role in our quadrant in the county, sort of out of necessity, but someone's got to do something. So I started, actually circulated the survey among other districts, just to get a sense.
Is it in a spreadsheet?
And a spreadsheet, I did. Would you like to see it? Just in terms of the percentage of the budget that is represented by transportation in each of these districts. So for us going into next year, we're looking at about 11% of the budget being transportation. On average, and the survey just went out yesterday, right before I left to come over, I had gotten about 9 responses. So at this point, the average among those 9 districts is about 6% of their budget. We're at 11. For the 21-22, we're at about 10%. So we're well above the average, at least, it's a small sample. I will get more responses, I'm sure, and I'll update you with more information there. But that's just to give you some additional perspective on some of the challenges that we are facing in the transportation. This slide may look familiar to some of you. I had a similar slide last year, but this is updated now with current numbers. So you can see some of the changes and the significant increases in individual transportation contracts to different schools. School number 1, we were paying $800 per student last year. We had to rebid that. Now we're paying $3,000, almost $3,000 for the first student, $1,000 for each additional student. So that's resulting in an added cost of about $32,000. The last 4 schools there are schools we didn't transport students to last year, but we are this year. And you can see we're paying, in some cases, $6,500 per student, which is $65,000 a year, which is tuition at a competitive college and university. And this is just for the transportation. For one of these schools is a charter school. We're paying less for the tuition for the child to be educated than we are for the child to be transported to the school. So these numbers, to me, they're just they're not right. Really, just to put it bluntly. I think we're being taken advantage of. We're not the only ones, and someone's got to do something to kind of rein that in a little bit. But these are some of the numbers that we are seeing. Any questions about any of this? Transportation. Let's move on. All right. So just in terms of some financial information to consider as we go forward, the rate of inflation that is used as part of our tax cap calculation, as set by the comptroller, was 4.7% for 2021. That rate, for the purposes of our tax cap, is calculated in January. State aid payments currently to the district in the governor's proposed budget, excluding the UPK funding, which I leave out because it's handled a little differently, is about $13.8 million, which represents an increase of $1.1 million over the state aid that was projected in the approved state budget for 21-22. The legislators historically have come back and gotten us more state aid as part of the little game that is played in Albany, so that they can look like they've gotten us additional funding. While I'm hopeful that will happen this year, given the rate of increase in the foundation aid that's already been included in the governor's proposal, I'm a little concerned that may not happen again this year. But I am hopeful, so it would be nice to get additional funding. In terms of personnel additions in the budget, we are proposing to add a custodian at Chestnut Street. As you know, we opened our pre-K center at the end of January. We've got currently 1 classroom in use. We have now gotten interest in more than enough, from more than enough parents to fill all the seats that are funded by the UPK allocation from the state at this point. So we're looking to probably have at least 3 classrooms filled next year. it's more classrooms, it's more space, kids are messy. We're gonna need to add additional custodial staff, just the one at Chestnut Street, to make sure the space is safe and that it's clean for all the students. And right, at the moment, we do not actually have a custodian at Chestnut. We do have cleaners, so the building is being cleaned, but custodians have a broader range of skills to do repairs and things like that. So that is one of our proposals. In terms of the retirement contributions, I mentioned them earlier. This is just a little more detail. The ERS system, which is mostly our non-instructional staff, we're projecting a small increase of about $40,000. The TRS system, again, that rate increased from 9.8% to 10.3%. Doesn't look like much when you look at it that way. So it's a 0.5% increase, but a 0.5% increase on a 10% figure is 5% right there. And when you add on top of that increases in salaries, we're looking at an increase of about 11% in our TRS contribution. In terms of this 2% tax levy cap, if you're like me, you saw Newsday a few weeks back saying 2% tax levy cap, just with no explanation or context in their article, really explaining that the 2% is just a part of the formula. And it's not a cap, and it's not 2%. I think if you look, you'd be hard pressed to find anyone whose actual tax levy cap was 2%. The tax cap is really a threshold. You can, as a district, propose a budget that exceeds the tax cap. Really doesn't go over well. Most districts that try that. We are not, to be clear, we are not proposing a budget that exceeds the tax cap. But if we were to do that, it would require 60% of the public to vote yes. It's a very high threshold.
Mr. Nagaraji is saying that you're a little broken up. If you could speak up a little.
Speak up. So I can turn the camera. Just speak
louder.
Speak louder? Okay.
Oh.
Excellent. All right, I will do that. In terms of the tax cap calculation, there are a number of factors in there. So one of those is the tax-based growth factor. That is basically the increase in the taxable properties within the district. So for us in West Hempstead, that's 0.4% going into next year. I was a bit lower last year. The allowable levy growth factor, that 2% in here, is really it's the lesser of 2% or the rate of inflation. Again, rate of inflation was 4.7%, so we use that 2% in our formula. Pilots are payments in lieu of taxes. Those are payments that are they're basically tax rebates or reductions given by the industrial development agencies to properties in the district. So instead of paying property taxes, they pay these pilots. That is another factor in our formula. And then the tax levy associated with capital projects, both in the district and with massive OCs, that's also part of the formula. So here is the formula in all its glory. I'm not going to walk through it, but basically we start with the current year tax levy, the 47.8 million. We work in all those factors I just discussed, and at the end we come out with our tax levy limit for 22-23, which is 48.8 million, which is that 2.14% and is within our tax cap. We are, there's surveys that go out through the associations of school board officials, through the superintendents organizations as well. Our tax levy increase to the 2.14% is in line with a lot of the districts, especially the surrounding districts and the other districts in Nassau County. There are some that are higher, some that are as high as 3%. There are some that are lower, but we are generally in that range of what the median is for Nassau County. Our bond project borrowing does have an impact on our budget. So today we have borrowed $34.25 million of the total $35.6 million that the voters have authorized us to borrow for bond projects through the use of bond anticipation notes, that is short-term debt, and serial bonds, which is the longer-term debt. We will need to borrow some additional funds to complete our Project C projects. We're going to use bands for that initially until the work is done, and then we will do serial bonds, which would be the longer-term debt. So as a result, the debt service is going to increase about $91 million. In terms of facilities projects that we have going on, these are not projects actually that are funded through the district, but that are in planning stages or that have begun. Our Smart Schools bond projects are projects that are funded by an allocation from New York State. This is not funded through debt service. So we have security cameras going in district-wide, wireless door locks, and gateways and things like that to control the wireless door locks. As you'll remember, a year ago, we presented the federal stimulus spending that included replacement of unit ventilators, primarily at our high school and middle school. That is still in the works. The unit ventilators, again, are the devices in the classrooms that provide heat and bring fresh air into the classrooms. We have replaced most of the unit ventilators district-wide. Cornwall and GW had theirs replaced as part of Project B. Chestnut Street has its own system, and we've got a new system in that pre-K area as well. It's really the STEM classrooms at the middle school as well when we did Project B. Those were replaced. So it's really at the high school, middle school. Those are among some of the oldest unit ventilators that we have. Additionally, there are projects in the works that have been funded from prior year budgets. The exterior wall here at the high school, we have budgeted to replace that. We've had some water leak issues there. And renovation of the high school kitchen had been budgeted in a previous year's budget. In terms of the actual bond projects going on that have been completed recently, this is our new high school media center, formerly the library. It's truly transformed for those who have seen it. It's beautiful. It's a beautiful space, and the kids have really taken to it. They've been using it a lot. Some additional pictures. We've added some flexible seating in there, new bookshelves. In the upper right there, that's our the little internet nook, the internet cafe over there where students can do their computer research. Lower left is the classroom that is adjacent to and attached to the library. As you can see there, that's really turned into a collaborative learning space. There are new tables there. There are more tables than are shown in that picture. Each table has its own monitor where they can display the work that the teacher may be doing. It could also be plugged in, the monitors can be plugged into laptops and Chromebooks at the individual tables so that the students can work collaboratively there as well. We've got new whiteboards in there, projectors on their way. They're caught up in the current supply chain problems that we have worldwide. And that tell from the picture there, that border around that whiteboard, that was actually constructed by one of our very talented maintenance staff members. And the piece de resistance is the Ram Pride logo that everyone sees as they walk in to, as they walk into the library. Additionally, the family consumer science classroom at the high school has been renovated from the ground up. They've got new appliances, new furniture, new storage and things like that. Kids are baking up a storm, cooking up a storm in there. The old high school little theater has been returned to its former glory, or possibly exceeded its former glory. I think it would exceeded. Excellent. We've got new flexible seating in there, whiteboard, projectors, computers in there. A great space to do presentations, debate clubs, mock trials, maybe even a board meeting. It's a little small, maybe this week. That's in there. Additionally, we included an ADA ramp at the high school, so now the front entrance to the high school is accessible to those who may have a disability or maybe using a wheelchair. We have redone all of the parking lots at 4 of the 5 buildings. All of the parking lots have been milled, repaved, and relined. The middle school parking lot was essentially a gut renovation down to its foundation. There was new drainage added in there, all new asphalt. It was actually incredible to watch them work. That space it's much larger once they dig it out and really look at it. Make a great Olympic-sized swimming pool. Over at Chestnut, these are nearly completed projects. So this is one of the pre-K classrooms that is completed, not currently being occupied, but this is the other classroom that is being occupied by a bunch of incredible young learners. We were there on opening day to greet them. They were excited to be there, as were we. And sometimes we kind of sneak down there when we need a little break and need a little refreshment, just take in the excitement of these young learners. So that's almost done. Middle school gym addition also nearly completed. The exterior is done, including pavement on the outside. We are just awaiting the completion of the interior space. The heating should be completed this week. Once the heating is completed, then the space can be heated, which will allow them to install the floor, do the wall treatments, and install the bleachers in that space. These projects here were not part of the bond. They were funded from previous year's budget. So Cornwall Avenue and George Washington all had their kitchens renovated from the floor up, so floor, ceiling, and wall tile, new equipment, walk-in freezers, and serving lines. High school auditorium is nearly completed. The ceiling is done. I think it's done.
Is it done?
I think it's
Fix
done.
that one
I'll
file.
go with Don.
We'll go
Go
with
with
done.
done.
All right, we're going with done for now. But it looks great. There's new lighting up there. We've got new theatrical lighting on the stage and along the sidewalls. Again, this was another victim of the worldwide supply chain problem. We don't have all the lighting fixtures in place, but they are on their way. There's new aisle lighting in there as well. The arbor, we're getting a new arbor. We got new tormentors. All right, now we're throwing terms out. At the rear of the auditorium, we have new acoustical wall panels. There's a new projector and a new screen on the stage. And the former projection room has been converted to a sound and lighting booth. We also have new sound equipment, whole new sound system, which sounds incredible. We are looking forward to that being done so that our students can really showcase our students. Our playgrounds are nearly completed. At this point, we're just waiting on some warmer weather so that they can finish out the final layer of the safety surface and that our grounds guys can get in there and kind of level things out. So that's it for all of our facilities. A lot of stuff going on. We're very excited about that. So now let's get into some of the numbers. This is the consolidated budget grouped together by function code groupings. And we'll get into the specifics. These are the codes we're going to talk about tonight, the non-instructional areas. And let's go. So what I plan to do, and stop me at any time if anyone has any questions, I'm going to do what I've done in the past and just go through the line items and mention the ones where where I feel there's a significant notable change. But ask me if you have questions about any of the lines. Just please feel free to ask. But having said that, the slide one here, there's really not any significant changes of note in this slide. Slide number 2, again, the same thing, really, nothing of note. These first 2 slides are largely central office and related expenses, personnel, legal services, public information, and things like that. We start getting into the facilities codes. We have increases here. That new custodial salary is in 1620 code. We have the other increases really there are salaries as well as increases that are largely driven by utilities expenses, oil, gas, water, and electric. Otherwise, on this slide, there's really not much of an increase. The 5,000 codes, these are our transportation codes. So this is where you'll see that those increases that I talked about earlier in both the contracted transportation and BOCE's contracted transportation lines. And in terms of employee benefits, again, we've talked about this 90-10 and 90-20, those first 2 lines, those are our retirement fund contributions. 90-30 is our Social Security Medicaid expenses. Those rates are fixed, but the amount that we have to pay goes up because the salaries have increased. Workers' comp has increased a little bit. We were able to lock in very low rates for a couple of years, the last 2 years. That rate lock has expired, so our rates are going up a little bit there. And then again, in health insurance, we talked about, that was our increase of about $680,000. Any questions about any of this?
What's the youth program, 7310?
The youth program was something that was implemented during COVID. We were required to provide child care services for first responders. So we did that. So we have a couple of years of expenses in there. We haven't done that this year, and we don't project that going forward. Okay. All right. In terms of debt service, again, not much change here other than what I mentioned earlier, that our debt service is going to increase by about $91,000 going into next year. Any questions on This slide. All right, and that's our line items. Just keeping in mind, these are preliminary numbers. We're still waiting for the state's final budget to be adopted with final state aid numbers. As things change, we will keep the board and the community informed, and we'll come back if need be later at March 22nd meeting. Just finally here, just continuing our conversation, our next budget workshop is next week, Tuesday, March 8th, same time, same place. We'll talk about instructional budget, we'll talk about revenue and state aid in a little bit more detail. Maybe we'll dig into the tax cap a little bit more if anyone's interested. Maybe Ms. Bryant, yeah, you want me to do that? Excellent. And then again, our budget vote is Tuesday, May 17th in the middle of school gym. And with that, I'll open it up if there are any questions.
Okay, so I have two questions and basic questions. So one, when we talk about the additional custodial staff at Chestnut Street, and we budgeted for approximately $57,000 for that, is that including their salary and health insurance and whatnot, that amount, or is that just a salary amount?
No, the amount you'll see in the line item is just their salary.
Salary.
The benefits are all in the benefits.
Okay, and also, I just want to go back to the busing for a minute, because I want to make sure that everybody understands that those numbers, which is insane to me, while it's not on us and, we can't do anything to change it other than fight them, these numbers are monthly, not yearly numbers that we're looking at.
Yes.
$6,500
Right.
is a monthly number, not a yearly number.
Right.
And if I'm not mistaken, last year we reached out to some of the legislators or, some of our politicians to see if there was any help that they could give us in the fact that these people were price gouging busing because they could and they were getting away with it. Did we have any response from them, and was there anything that they seemed to be able to help us with?
I've not gotten any response. I bring it up wherever I can. I even brought it up on a webinar that was run by the New York State School Boards Association, where they were talking about the state budget. I said, we're not seeing competitive bidding on transportation down on Long Island. It seems to be falling on deaf ears, and the response that we get is, well, there's a driver shortage. Which is not, these increases, as you saw, started a few years back. Pre-COVID, they've just gotten worse since then, but I don't think it's driven by the driver shortage, but that is generally the response that we get.
Yeah, and I have heard it, sorry. I have heard it in my Nassau Suffolk School Board's meetings, when we're sitting in an executive meeting and every district on Long Island is having the same conversation about, maybe they don't bus to as many places as we do, but they are still all having busing issues. So.
As you know, you and I sent a letter to Senator Kaminsky about UPK, as well as Joel and I will be following up with our local politicians to discuss this transportation issue further, just like we did last year. We have to continue to reach out and make it a priority because we want to make sure that all of our students, all of the students in our community get what they need. But in the same vein, it's pay $65,000 for a bus for one student when their tuition doesn't seem right, and we could be using that money elsewhere for those students.
Do we have any other questions from the board at this time? Joe, you got to stop walking around. It's like Blair Witch out there. But do you have any questions for Joel?
No, I'm good, thank you.
If for the moment, I'm going to say that there's no questions from the board at the moment. So I'm going to open up for questions from the audience. So if you have a question in the virtual world or in public, if you could, in the virtual world, raise your hand and I will call on you to unmute yourself and ask your question. Mr. Azos, would you like to unmute yourself and ask your question?
Yes, hi, thank you. Can you hear me?
It's a little low, but yes.
Hi, thank you for that thorough presentation. I'm hearing an echo, so I'm sorry if I could take it through it. You mentioned very briefly in the presentation about stimulus funds, federal stimulus funds for COVID, specifically relating to funding the ventilation system. I'm wondering if there were any additional stimulus funds that were not used, in specific, how much of the stimulus funds was actually collected by the district, and if the ventilation system was the only thing that the stimulus funds were used for. Thank you.
Okay. So there's information on the district's website that will go into more detail about what we had budgeted the stimulus funding for. I don't have that information here, but we received about 3 million in stimulus funding in total. There were two different groupings of the stimulus funding. We did budget for the bulk of one of those groupings of fundings to replace the unit ventilators because they're actually very costly to replace. But there are additional things that we did budget for spending from the stimulus, including some additional staff members, additional equipment, some supplies and materials for the pre-K center. We budgeted for some Chromebooks as well, and things of that nature. But there's more detail on the district website if you'd like to take a look.
Thank you.
Just look at this time. Do we have any other questions? The only hand I still see up, Mr. Rizos, is yours. So are there any other questions from the audience? Mr. Zelig, you have a question? Would you like to unmute yourself?
Yeah, can you hear me?
I can.
Okay, perfect. Last year's budget was a 5.72% spending increase, which was seventh highest out of the 121 districts in Nassau County and Suffolk County. 100 of those were under 4%. On the tax levy side, 20 districts approved negative or 0% increases. West Hempstead approved to spend 2.11%, which was 16th highest out of the same 121 districts. For 10 out of the last 11 years, the board has over budgeted the projected versus actual budget every year. Have the amounts, but I'll just start from the last few years. Like 2015, 2016 was 3.2 million. 16, 17 was about 5 million. 17, 18 was 3.3 million. 2018 was 2.3 million. 2019, 20 was 3 million, 3.1. And 2020, 21 was about 3.8 million. You're looking for 71 million this year, and you spent 61 million in 2021. And in 2021, you asked for 4 million more than was actually needed. That was the 3.8 million surplus I just referred to. Where is the 4 million and from there, and why are you asking for more than is needed?
I think budgeting the way that we do budget is actually prudent. We don't want to budget. We can't budget to the penny. We really have no idea when we're developing the budget everything that may turn up. So we budget prudently. We allow enough of a cushion in there to account for things like COVID that no one anticipated and the expenses that were associated with COVID. Transportation expenses that, again, when we develop the budget, we don't know what CPI is going to be. We don't at that point in time know which bus contractors are going to renew their contracts and things of that nature. So we do budget. We don't budget to the penny. No one does that. I don't think that's prudent. And so when we come in under budget, the other thing is we don't know what staffing is exactly going to look like. When we develop the budget, people retire, people move and change jobs, people come and go in the district. Salaries and benefits are our largest expense in there. So we have to do our best to try to account for what we think the expenses will be. I actually think we budget fairly tightly, for a budget of our size. I don't think those amounts that you mentioned are unreasonable at all. We also, if you, look at our revenue over expenditures, I think that's reasonable as well. That's my opinion. I suppose you could differ on that, but I do think when we go through these budgets, we budget as tightly as we can, while at the same time developing a reasonable budget.
And I would just like to add to your comment, Mr. Zelig, about those school districts that went out last year with either a 0 or a -% budget. This board chose to go out the year before with a 0% budget, which districts at that time were not doing. We just did it a year earlier than most.
And then if you're proposing a 71 million total, while in 2021 you only spent 61 million, so you just go into like a cost got up 16%. So that's the difference between the last.
You cut off, so I'm not gonna. I don't want to try to answer something that I didn't hear. So if you could just repeat that.
Sure. So the proposed budget is 71 million, while in 2021 you only spent 61 million. So I just want to understand the costs have gone up over 16% in the last couple of years.
Well, I mean, in some cases, they've gone up more than that. As you've seen from the transportation expenses have gone up, in the last 8 years, 97%. In the last 4 years, 75%. Again, medical insurance premiums in calendar year 2022 have gone up on average 12% for our active employees. Things like that. That's where these increases are coming from. Again, the transportation, we've been budgeting nearly $1 million of increase now for 3-4 years at this point. In a budget of our size, that's a huge chunk, and it's difficult for us to contain costs. We'd like to keep costs, relatively low, but when we're seeing $1 million expenses in budgets where, in a good year, our revenue, like this year, our revenue is increasing about $2 million, and we're seeing expenses increase greater than that. So that's, as I said, we went through the budget and, talked about the areas where we're seeing cost increases. I don't think any of this stuff is unreasonable.
Okay, and then last one on jeopardize time. And I know this is going to be talked about more at the next meeting, but the regular school instruction 2110, it was acknowledged on the restructuring meeting call that enrollment has declined, or I think it was fluctuating, the term was used. I could see instruction going up like 2 or 2.5%. Less students overall, I would think would equate to less teachers. Please can you explain how the proposed budget line item is almost a 10% increase when enrollment drops as stated, and then when you add that line item plus the benefits associated with its increase, it's approximately like 2 million of fluff in the budget. So I wanted to understand why you're imposing a tax increase.
Can you repeat the last part, sir? Couldn't hear it.
Sure. So the last part was when you add that line item plus the benefits associated with its increase, it's the 2 million. It's about 2 million of fluff in the budget. So I wanted to understand why you're imposing a tax increase. And if I need to repeat the whole thing, I can. Sorry about that.
We have contractual. I mean, I'm going to let Joel really speak to this, but we have contractual obligations that we have to fulfill. We don't put fluff into the budget. And sometimes, honestly, we go through this year by year, and every year somebody is stating that there's fluff or that we're padding somebody's pocket somewhere, which is not accurate. I mean, I've sat on this board now since 2012, and we're a very prudent and fiscally responsible board in the way we budget. I've watched and seen the way other districts have budgeted, and I've read the newspapers as well. And there were years, we had a year, I can't think of, I was on the board. We budgeted within $16,000 of our budget. That's dangerous. That year we spent within $16,000 of the budget we put out. That's not safe for a school district to do. We have issues like a wall falling outside or, a water leakage or the ceiling falling down. If that money's not there to spend, then we have a serious issue. I understand you're asking about instructional issues, which is part of next week's presentation. And I will let Mr. Press speak to that, but I do want to say that fluff is a little harsh of a word. Inappropriate, Mr. Press.
In terms of, the largest component of the instructional budget is salaries. The way we budget that is based on our contractual obligations. But, as I mentioned, things change, people change. We have to build in things like substitute teacher costs, which again, between substitute teacher costs and coverages during COVID was incredibly expensive. So a prudent budget allows for the unknown in there, but that expense, that instructional line, is driven largely by salaries. It also includes, supplies and materials, library materials, equipment, computer aided instruction. So some of our computer infrastructure and supplies and materials along those lines. So we budget for things because things break in terms of equipment and supplies. We need books, we need textbooks, things like that. I also disagree with the use of the term fluff. I don't think that's an accurate statement.
At this point, do we have any other questions from the audience in the virtual world? I don't see any hands up here. Mr. Zelig, I see your hand is still up. Did you have another question?
I was going to lower it, but I guess if no one else is going to ask, I could just ask one more. Can you just go into, I know we've talked about the amount in surplus that's now at $17 million. Can you just go into, I guess, that amount and break that down? I know we talked about you mentioned one year, 2013-14, which was only $18,000 over, but if you could just go into the amount of surplus, I know that's grown over time, and I've asked this in the past and discussed this. Can you just go over what that's in, and is there a number that you're trying to raise that to? Because like there was a point where there was nothing. Thank you.
I'm not. Are you asking about the reserve funds? I'm just trying to understand.
Yes, the reserve.
Sure.
Yeah. So we have a number of reserves that we have funded over the last number of years. Those reserves each have specific purposes that the funds in those reserves can be used for. We have two of them that are for retirement contributions. One of them is for paying out things like unused sick days. We have unemployment in there as well. So those we're not looking to build them to any particular level. We think actually right now they're at a fairly healthy level. Keeping those reserves at a healthy level actually helps us greatly in our borrowing for our bond projects. The bond rating agencies really like to see healthy reserves, so that allows us to get lower interest rates when we do go out to borrow. So those reserves I think are at good levels right now. Honestly, I think we could use additional reserves like a capital reserve to fund, we have a lot of old buildings. We did a lot of work with these bond projects, but we didn't do all of the work that was included in the original bond proposal. There's things that are aging in these buildings, things that need to be replaced. A capital reserve would help us with that as well, or a repair reserve. So that's where the reserves are. And our fund balance, we are within the 4% that is allowed under state law. That allows us to weather certain storms, like we run into with the bond project. I had a discovered condition where one of the walls had a crack in it that needed to be repaired. It's expensive. We didn't anticipate that because it was behind the plaster walls and the wallboard, things like that. So our reserves are at healthy levels. Our fund balance is at the level that is allowed by law. And again, I think that's been the result of prudent fiscal planning by the board.
I'm going to give one more second to see if there's any other questions from the audience. I see no other hands raised. Okay, so with that being said, I just want to remind everybody that next week, it's the month of March. We're here every week. Next week will be our discussion on instructional budgetary items. And the Tuesday following that will be our regular business meeting. And the Tuesday following that will be our additional budget meeting should the need arise if the numbers change or if we get any further information. Oh, actually, we're not here the last week in March. I'm at a different budget meeting. Not so. So that's a good one. We have a week off. Thank you very much for joining us. And at this point, I need a motion to move into executive session for advice of counsel.
So moved.
Second.